Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Please be seated. So some of you know that I have 6 kids, and 3 of those kids are adopted. But before they were adopted, they were our foster children. And this was back when we lived on the farm, and the kitchen led into the family room, but you couldn't see what was going on in there from the kitchen. I tried to listen as I was cooking supper or cleaning or doing the dishes or whatever I was doing, just to make sure they weren't killing each other or damaging anything irreplaceable, you know. But in general, I didn't really listen to what they were saying. One day, I started paying attention for some reason to the words that were being spoken, and I was totally horrified. I heard one of the little boys saying, "Bring me an expletive beer." Now I'm thinking to myself, where did he ever hear that? I mean, was it television? We didn't really watch much television, so I'm trying to think where he could have gotten that. And as I'm listening, I hear this really horrible, sexist, angry, alcohol-laden dialogue happening between these children. And I realize they are playing their previous foster home. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, well, at least they're now in a place of normalcy, where they are going to hear good, positive things and have an example of the way to be, right? And just as I'm thinking those things with a total lack of humility and personal insight, my oldest biological son joins in the game. And while he wasn't saying anything even close to what these other kids were saying, it was bad enough, right? And I could hear myself in his words. And I wanted to walk into that family room and say, "Hey, I am not like that. Cut it out. Quit saying those things. That isn't me. You're making this up." Except that would have totally made my point, right? And it just struck me how children learn to be adults from the people they're around, right? How children learn to become who they are from the examples in their life. And that is how we become adults, right? We see who's around us. We see how they cope with things, how they talk about things, their behavior, and we try on different styles and ways to be an adult, and eventually we settle on who we want to be. But I realized as I was watching them that there were some things that I needed to change about myself in order to be the kind of example that I wanted to be for my children, especially children who had obviously been traumatized. And it also struck me as really irritating, but a good thing, that children also learn how to take care of the mistakes that they've made, right? They see adults making mistakes, they see adults making errors, but then they also can see adults fixing that, growing from that, becoming better. Again, irritating, but good that there's hope of redemption, that we also model that. So we don't have to be perfect. I'm not perfect. Obviously, if you watch my children play, you'll know that. But we have a chance to become a little bit more together. But again, that whole moment has really shaped how I've thought about how we become who we are. So in the gospel today from Matthew, we have one of my least favorite, yet maybe most relevant passages. Jesus, we are reminded today, is fully human. Jesus is fully human. He is a product of his family, of his culture. He has been raised up and taught who to like and who not to like, who is in and who is out. In Jesus' day, in his culture, the Jewish people were a tight group and anybody else was out, right? Anybody else was hated. In fact, the Gentiles, they didn't even talk to them. They wouldn't even have a conversation with them. And yet, here is Jesus, not sinning, but, on thin ice. Here is Jesus fleeing from the Jews, right? He's just had this encounter with them where they threatened to kill him, and so he takes a side trip into Gentile territory to protect himself and to protect his disciples. And this woman, who knows who he is, who knows the power that he holds, who believes in him. She wants him to heal her daughter. And Jesus won't even answer her, won't even acknowledge that she's there. So she starts to make a scene, right? Shame was a big deal in those days. You didn't want to be shamed. And so she starts to gather a crowd, and she calls on his ancestry and says, you are the son of David. Have mercy on me. There's a high standard here, buddy. He ignores her. His disciples start getting anxious, uncomfortable about how this is unfolding. Do something about this woman. Nothing. She has to come and kneel before him and block his path in order for him to see her. And even then, she humbles herself and she says, please, heal my daughter, as any desperate parent would. Heal my daughter, please. And Jesus calls her a dog. Low moment. But here she is. She bests him. Sharp as anything, she gives it right back. If you read the Gospel, she is the only one who trumps Jesus. She's the only one who can give it back to him. And he gets it, and he respects her. He changes his mind about her. He sees her, maybe for the first time, as a person, as a human being. Because that's how we get away with ignoring others, right? We dehumanize them. We pretend they aren't important and human and real. We pretend they aren't like us. And Jesus, in front of him, sees someone who believes in him. And not only does he grant her healing for her daughter, but more significantly, he allows it to change him. He allows that moment to help him to realize that maybe he has a bigger calling here. That maybe there's a bigger picture, that maybe he is not just for the lost sheep of Israel, but maybe it's for the whole world. He changes his sense of himself and his mission because of this woman. Notice that he doesn't just tolerate her. It isn't just a grudging acceptance or, I can't get rid of you, so I'm just going to take care of it. No, I'm done with tolerance. I'm done with just merely tolerating. In the reading from Isaiah, we hear maintain justice. We hear God saying, everyone is welcome on my holy mountain. Every sacrifice is acceptable. Everyone. God is saying to us, you better figure out who you don't like here, because that's the person you're going to be sitting next to on my holy mountain. You better figure that out and take care of it, because everyone's going to be there, including you. But everyone's going to be there. I've talked before about how I was raised in a very prejudiced household. And it's come to me recently to pay attention to how much of my behavior is just so ingrained from that I don't even think about it. When we were little kids, and we would drive into the city of Chicago, my parents, the minute we got off the highway, they'd say, okay, roll up the windows and lock the doors. They didn't say why, but they didn't have to, right? And I just did that. I thought that was what you did. I did that into my adulthood until I heard someone speak and say, do you know what it feels like when someone looks at you and rolls up the windows and locks the door? He said, do you think I don't see that? I am not dangerous to you. Why do you treat me that way? I was blown away. It was one of those moments when you realize that something you don't even think about hurts people. Something that you learned, that you saw other people do. So in these dangerous and very troubling times, I think there are 3 things that we can do to make a difference. And the first one is to work on ourselves. I think we need to see ourselves as our children, as our community sees us, and make sure that we are setting the kind of example, that we are behaving in the way that we want other people not just to see, but to also be. We want to be what we expect from others. Second thing we need to consider is that it is no longer acceptable to merely tolerate. It is no longer acceptable to be silent. It is no longer acceptable to be conflict avoidant. I don't like conflict either. But we can no longer say, I'm not going to be involved in this. Every time we hear something offensive, every time we hear something that should not be said, every time there's a joke that is not funny, we need to say no. We have to speak it. And you can just very simply say, you know what, I'm offended by that. Or, please don't talk that way around me. It can be just as simple as that. But we can no longer tolerate any kind of hatred, period. And then the final thing that I think we need to be very aware of and intentional about is building a community where everyone is welcome. Building God's holy mountain right here, where every sacrifice, every gift is acceptable. Where every person is not just tolerated, but loved. We need to make sure that in this place, no one feels lonely, no one out in the world feels unacceptable or afraid. That everyone is welcome here to join us and be a part of who we are. And that is hard, holy work. And sometimes I go home at night and I am so tired that I can't even turn on the remote. And sometimes I'm pretty darn discouraged. But when I take a deep breath and pray, I realize that I'm a part of something bigger than myself. That I am a part of a community that loves and accepts people. And that with God's help, any good thing is possible. Any good thing is possible.